Hi, welcome to chapter 1, 2, and 3 of Ranch and Red Herrings, the first book in the Bluegrass Ridge. It's a Hi, and welcome to chapter 1, 2, and 3 of Ranch and Red Herrings. This week is the first book in the Bluegrass Ridge Ranch Cozy Mystery Series. Chapter 1. There's something about death that doesn't set your mind right, or maybe it's grief rolling in like a thick fog and muffling everything around you, even memories. Sitting here in Uncle Amos's house, my uncle's house, the very heart of Bluegrass Ridge. I felt both there and somewhere far away. I hadn't seen him in years, and I wasn't talking a few or a handful. I was talking like over 10, heck, maybe even 15. Not since the last time my daddy had set foot in his small Kentucky hometown of Bluegrass Ridge and brought me with him. He'd been dead for 13 years, so it was well before that. Yet here I was sitting at this old oak table surrounded by family I hadn't spoken to in the same amount of time. The smell of worn leather and faint tobacco smoke lingered in the air. Of course, we kept in touch through social media, a like here or a like there, a comment, even a private message when Uncle Amos had suddenly passed away from what doctors called a widowmaker heart attack, the same thing that killed my dad. But Uncle Amos and I had not audibly spoken to each other in I didn't know how long, and my cousins and I hadn't spoken either until this week, the funeral, and the hurried reading of the will for which I had no idea why I was even there. While I was sitting there thinking of just how I could get to the Greyhound, get my bus ticket refunded, or even exchanged for later this week since I had clearly not made it back after the funeral. I had to look across the old table at my cousin Bo, big and barrel chested, who was practically buzzing with excitement. His knee bounced under the table, jostling the wood. I saw the gleam in his eye every time he looked at the lawyer, as if to speed things along. Beside him sat his wife Maggie, her mouth set in a determined line, her eyes sharp as flint, taking in every word and side glance as if tallying up what she owed. I'd never met her, and since Daddy had died, my mama hadn't had much to do with the Hollingworth side of my family. And across from me sat another cousin, Tassie Ruth Hollingsworth Doyle, Beau's sister. Her dark curls coiled like springs beneath her wide-brimmed hat. She had her arm looped around her husband, Hunter, who wore an easy smile. Tassie's eyes, though, were anything but easy. There was an intensity there, an expectation like she'd been waiting for this day her whole life. I mean, I didn't blame them. Uncle Amos's working ranch had to be worth millions of dollars. The land alone was a pretty penny. But I still had no clue why I had to be at the will reading. They all thought they knew what was coming, and maybe I did too. I mean, I figured Uncle Amos would leave Bo and Tassie the ranch and, whatever was on it. And maybe I got this old table. Sentimental, yes, but meaningful. And it seemed just like Amos. And if that was the case, there was no way I was going to be able to fit this table in my small city apartment, even though Rowan, my roommate, would flip over this table. I ran my fingers over the tabletop, tracing the smooth, swirling burl wood, feeling the slight dip and rise beneath my hand, as familiar as my own memories. I could smell the faint hint of old varnish and old wood that lingered in its grooves. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I let that memory of Uncle Amos take me. Suddenly, I was 12 years old again, back in the deep woods behind the pastures, struggling to keep up with his long strides as we hiked into the shades of the towering trees. We stopped in front of an enormous oak with a rough burl jutting out from its trunk, twisting and bulging like a knot made by giants. "See here, cussy," he said, resting a big calloused hand on the burl. His voice was low and a bit scratchy. "This here's a burl. It's nature's way of turning hardships into beauty. The wood grows all twisted up, fighting to survive, and it makes the finest grain you ever saw." He turned to me with a rare smile. His sun-worn face was soft. "One day, I'm going to make you a table out of this wood, something sturdy, so you can always have a piece of this place, no matter where you go," he said. This place. I could almost feel the warmth of his hand on my shoulder, the roughness of his work-worn fingers. The smell of pine needles and wet earth filled my senses and blended with the memory of his quiet laughter. But that place quickly became a distant memory after Dad and I drove off and went back to the city, where my mom had planned out my future of going to college, having this life in the great big world. And to this day, she constantly harps on when I would find a real job and use my degree for real money, get an adult apartment. Okay. So that one always stung Rowan because she considered her artsy side, like coloring, creating, and writing, an adulting thing. And well, me, I did odd jobs to pay the bills until I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life. A sharp gas jerked me back to the present moment, back to the dim light of Uncle Amos's dining room. The scent of dust and old wood once again filled my nose. I blinked, and everyone was staring at me with their mouths slightly agape, eyes flickering between the lawyer and me. I looked around, and the heat crept up my neck. "What?" I asked. Tassie leaned forward, her expression caught between shock and disbelief. "Did you even hear what the lawyer said?" I shook my head, feeling like I was trying to push through the fog. No?" Bo let out a disbelieving chuckle, almost a bark, and the sound grated loud in the quiet room. His eyes were flushed. The eyes in his flushed face blazed as he leaned toward me. The familiar scent of his cologne, something sharp and woodsy, came across the table. "Daddy gave you the ranch, cussy." His voice was low, almost a growling murmur. "He left the whole dang thing to you." For a moment, all I could hear was the ticking of the old clock on the wall, slow and steady like a heartbeat, while the weight of Bo's words sank in. I studied my cousin's face, Bo's shock, Tassie's cold and unreadable expression, Maddie's pinch of irritation, and Hunter's bewilderment all seemed to blur together as I struggled to catch my breath. The ranch? Uncle Amos had left the entire ranch to me? I glanced down at the table, my hand still resting on its sturdy surface. Right then, I knew that whatever dreams Bo and Tassie had come here with had just shattered, as sharply as if they'd been broken over the edge of this very table. Chapter 2. "Are you okay, Cassie?" The familiar voice, a gentle but firm presence, cut through the silence of the room. "I'd been here almost a couple hours, honey." I looked up and was surprised to see Nettie Face standing in the doorway. Her figure was backlit by soft light spilling in from the kitchen. She was in her usual worn apron, its once bright flowers faded by years of soap and sunshine, and her silver hair was tucked into a neat bun. She'd been Uncle Amos's housekeeper for as long as I could remember, logging even, but I used to joke that Nettie Faye came with the ranch like one of the old oak trees out front. "Oh, Nettie Faye." I rubbed my templates, trying to shake off the lingering fog of disbelief. I don't know if I'm okay." She gave me a knowing look and walked in, her soft soled shoes barely making a sound on the worn wooden floors as she made her way to the table. My cousins were long gone, and they'd fallen silent after the reading, probably too stunned to argue, but I could still hear the squeals of their tires as they peeled out in a hurry. The lawyer had simply slid a business card and a copy of the deed across the table in front of me, mumbling something about getting in touch once I'd wrapped my head around it. Bo left his business card too, and after I stood up, I found my head buried in Nettie Faye's shoulder. She extended two open arms like she did when I bucked off the horse and rushed inside the house more from embarrassment than pain. Nettie Faye said, giving the business card a sideways glance through a chin towards Bo's. Bet that one didn't have a single clue this was coming either. She pulled out a chair and she pulled out a chair next and sat down. She patted the chair next to her for me to sit. She folded her hands in her lap as she watched me with those sharp, steady eyes. I reckon Amos would be pleased, though, she said softly. He'd always said this place was meant for someone who loved it. I felt a rush of warmth in my chest, mixed with something close to panic. But Nettie Faye, I haven't been here since I was a kid. Besides, I don't know the first thing about running a ranch. Bo and Tassie, they know this place inside and out. They grew up here, not me, I said. Nettie Faye reached out and patted my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. Time. She threw a hand in the air. What's that? Always had a feeling you'd find your way back, and so did Amos. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, the kind look that she always did. It was different for you and Amos, she said. He never expected you to stay tied down. He just hoped one day you'd feel the pull to come back. Or force me to when he died, I said under my breath. Did he talk about me? I asked, surprised about how small my voice sounded in this big house. Oh, on more than a little. Oh, more than a little, she replied, a hint of smile tugging at her mouth. He'd tell me stories about you heading off into the wood, ask him all sorts of questions about trees and birds, always curious as a cat. He was proud of you, Cussie. He'd be just as proud now. I looked down at the table and traced a line along the edge, remembering the day Uncle Amos had told me about that old burl tree. He made this table for me, you know, I said. He said he'd give me something sturdy, something I'd always feel like was home. Nettie Faye replied with a warm, low chuckle. Well, he did have a knack for thinking ahead, she nodded to the deed, which rested on the table. Guess he thought you might need more than just a table, though. Her voice softened as if she was speaking to herself. The land's got a way of knowing who it belongs to. A chill passed over me. A strange sort of weight settled on my shoulders. I glanced up and met her gaze and saw something unspoken in her expression, a deep and a depth I couldn't quite place. Tell you what, Nettie Faye said, breaking the moment with a gentle pat on my arm. Why don't you and I take it one step at a time? There's a lot I can show you, and there's time enough to figure things out. Amos didn't leave this ranch to you just to watch you flounder. He believed you could handle it. Her eyes held mine as her voice dropped in a whisper. And I do too, darling. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, feeling a strange surge of strength just from her steady presence. Thank you, Nettie Faye. I just don't know. I gulped again, feeling the weight pressing on my chest. I have a life, an apartment, friends, my home back in the city. Well, good thing you don't have a whole lot to sell, especially a house, she replied, standing up and smoothing the apron. And don't worry, this old house, those fields, they've got more secrets than most people reckon. But I know a few of them, and I'll show you what Amos left behind bit by bit. I opened my mouth to protest, but she waved a hand, cutting me off. I don't think you heard me, I said, trying to keep my tone light. A part of me wondered if she really hadn't heard me. I mean, Nettie Faye, my life was never here. Just a few weeks ago, just a few weeks here and there when my dad was alive, when I was a kid. She gave me a sly look and let out another low chuckle. Oh, I heard you, honey, she snickered, her eyes twinkling with mischief. I'll be back in the morning, and don't forget to let Champ in. He don't take kindly to sleeping out all night. Champ? I asked, startled. My mind flashed to the blue streak of fur I'd seen earlier, darting around the ranch earlier, but never got my attention fully. Most working ranchers around here had a few types of dogs. Uncle Amos's cattle dog. He's a blue heeler, she said, arching the eye. Loyal as the day is long, he'll keep close to the barn until you bring him in. And while you're at it, best check the horses and see they're settled for the night. I stammered, already feeling out of my depth. I don't do. And make sure you double latch the barn doors or the raccoons will find their way into the feed again. I swear they're smarter than most folks around here, she added with the wry smile, ignoring how I was protesting any sort of barn work. Last thing you want is to wake up and find the whole place torn apart. She paused, glancing out the window at the fading sunlight. Spring's here, which means Critter will be digging all around the fences too, so walk around the outer paddock. If you get a chance, there's some spare wire and tools in the tack room if you spot any holes. I stared at her, already feeling the weight of 1,000 tasks I barely understood. Nettie Faye must have seen the overwhelmed look on my face because she patted my shoulder with a gentleness I hadn't expected. It's just one even, darling. The ranch hands and the ranch manager is taking a day off, after Amos's funeral and all. You'll get the hang of it. I mean, left you a list on the counter along with the cast iron of some fried cornbread and soup beans on the stove. She gave my shoulder a light squeeze and then shuffled back towards the kitchen. Now go on and get it before it's full dark, and don't worry, Champ will keep you company. I watched her disappear into the back hallway. She left me alone with the deed, the lawyer's card, and my cousin's Beau's card, and the dawning realization that Uncle Amos's legacy was now my responsibility. I glanced out the window at the dimly lit sky. The pastures were bathed in the warm glow of the dusk, stretching out as far as I could see, painted gold and deep greens in the fading light. Somewhere out there, Champ was likely waiting, and the horses would need their evening meal. I drew in a shaky breath and squared my shoulders and pushed myself up from the table. I had no idea what to do about this ranch, but for tonight, it was all on my shoulders to keep it running like a well-oiled machine, just like Uncle Amos would have. Stepping out of the house, I was met by the cool, earthy smell of the evening. The pastures stretched out, bathed in that golden hue of dusk. Threads of pink came for a moment, and I just stood there taking it all in. The land, the quiet, the soft rustling of grass. I was a stranger here, yet the settling felt oddly familiar, like a half-forgotten memory brushing against my mind. I couldn't help but think of my dad. He had to be smiling right now, knowing that this was going on. Let's just say he wasn't a fan of Beau and Tassie's. He said they were little brats, and his brother did them no good by giving them everything they had wanted. I'd barely made it halfway to the bar when the blue and white blur came bounding toward me, tail wagging ferociously and Tug lolling out. Champ, I called, half expecting him to dart away. But the cattle dog skidded to a halt in front of me. He looked me dead in the eyes and let out a sharp bark as if to say, "It's about time you showed up." All right, I said, reaching down and giving him a scratch. Guess it's me and you tonight, huh? Champ gave a quick, encouraging bark, then trotted ahead of me toward the barn, casting a look back every few steps to make sure I was keeping up with him. When we reached the barn door, he stopped and sat and looked at me with his bright, expectant eyes. I took a deep breath and pushed open the barn door. The rich smell of hay and wood mixed with the warm, musky smell of horses and the combined scent washed over me as my eyes adjusted to the dimmer light. I saw a row of glossy heads poking out from the stalls, their ears pricking forward and their nose flaring as they took in my scent. They knew I was different, new even. Champ trotted over to the large bin along the wall, nosed it instantly, and then looked back at me. This one, huh? I asked, opening the lid. The rich, grainy scent of feed got caught up in my nose, and I reached in and grabbed a scoop. As I held it, I felt a momentary wave of uncertainty. Feeding a few horses sounded simple enough, but this situation was different. These horses were Amos's, trained and tended by him and the ranch hands. They were looking at me now, and I felt like I was being tested. Champ barked once and I let out a small laugh. Okay, I'm going. He trotted in the first stall where the chestnut mare watched me with curious, intelligent eyes. I stepped closer, and for a second, a memory of Uncle Amos's voice flooded back to me so clear, it was like he was right beside me. Always move steady, cussy girl. Horses can feel your energy. Show them you're calm, show them respect, and they'll give it to you back, I could hear him say. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and reached out to the mare, letting her sniff my hand. Her warm breath tickled my skin. Slowly, she leaned into my touch, pressing her soft nose into my palm. I rubbed her cheek, feeling the fine velvet of her coat beneath my fingers, and muttered, "There you go, girl. See, we're friends, right?" She gave a low nicker in response, and I couldn't help but smile. My confidence grew as I poured the feed into her bucket and then moved to the next stall. Another set of dark eyes watched me, those of a tall, sleek gelding with a white blaze down his nose. Champ barked as if to say, "Keep moving, rookie." I grinned, feeling warmth spread through me. The sound of the barn filled the air, the soft crunching of the oats, the gentle snorts, the shuffling of hooves, and the quiet rustle of hay as the horses settled down to eat. And with every stall I'd visited, more memories of Uncle Amos's drifted back to me. "Don't ever be afraid of them," he'd say, his voice steady and low. "They know if you're scared, and they don't respect it. Trust them, and they'll trust you." My movements became smoother and more natural as I opened each stall door and greeted each horse with a calming hand on their neck or a rub along their jaw and felt their warm, solid presence. The rhythm of the process was comforting, almost grounding, and by the time I reached the last stall, I almost felt at home. Champ, meanwhile, was waiting for me by the old gator vehicle parked in the corner of the barn. He hopped onto the seat and sat, looking as if an air of calm expectation, thinking that I knew what I was doing. "Oh, so now you're the boss, huh?" I teased, my voice soft but warm. "What next, Champ?" He gave a bark and wagged his tail as if to say, "It's about time you caught on." I climbed to the driver's seat next to him, where I noticed a roll of mesh wire and a set of tools already loaded in the back, just as Nettie Faye had mentioned. I started the engine, felt the familiar rumble beneath me, and followed Champ's cues as he guided me along the fence line. Every so often, he hopped out and sniffed a post or nudged a section of wire with his nose. I'd climb down and secure the fence as best I could. My hands were clumsy at first, but Champ's calm, steady presence assured me. I could almost feel Amos's quiet pride in the work as I fastened each section. By the time we finished and returned to the barn, the stars were starting to dot the sky. The fields lay quiet and peaceful under the dampening blue of night. Champ jumped down from the gator and padded over to me. He looked up at me with the same steady gaze. I knelt and gave him a long, grateful scratch behind his ear. "Thank you, Champ. I don't know what I would do without you." He gave a soft, approving bark and then trotted back towards the barn entrance, glancing back as if he was making sure I was following. I took one last look around the pasture at the barn in which Amos had poured into his life. The night air was cool and crisp, filling my lungs with a strange sort of calm. Tonight, I'd managed. "Here, boy!" A deep southern drawl floated in from the direction of the barn, followed by a sharp whistle. I spun around, my pulse quickened as I caught sight of the tall figure in a cowboy hat, his face shadowed by the fading light. I was alone out here, with nothing but the horses and Champ. The dog had trotted right over to the man without a moment's hesitation, his tail wagging furiously. "Excuse me," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you?" The man stepped into the dim light spilling out of the barn, and I could finally get a good look at him. He was tall, easily 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled out his button-up shirt like he was born to wear it. His faded jeans and scuffed boots told me he wasn't afraid to put a hard day's work in, and the tan cowboy hat perched on his head looked like it weathered just as much as he had. He took a step closer and out of that one barn, and the muted glow caught the rugged lines of his face. His chiseled jaw was shadowed with a day's worth of stubble, and faint crease lay in the corner of his deep blue eyes, likely from squinting into the sun. Those eyes, they reminded me of a storm rolling in with just a hint of gray that made them all the more intense. Then he tipped his hat in greeting. He exposed a lock of his brown, thick hair, thick, just as a little tousled, like he'd run his hands through it a few times. The small, respectful nod he gave me revealed a dimple that appeared for just a moment, adding a boyish charm to his otherwise rugged demeanor. "Evening, ma'am," he said. There was an easy drawl that made the tension in my shoulders ease despite myself. You must be Miss Georgia. My cheeks warmed. Only Uncle Amos had ever called me by my full name. Everyone else knew me as Cussie. The stranger had to have known my uncle well enough to hear him talk about me. And you are? I asked, tucking a loose strand of my hair behind my ear, feeling suddenly self conscious under his gaze. He smiled faintly, showing a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself, and tipped his hat again. Colt Morgan, ma'am. I was your uncle's ranch manager. Worked alongside him for nearly 8 years. He talked about you often and said he'd reckon you'd find your way back here one day. A warmth entered his voice when he spoke of Uncle Amos, a quiet respect that softened the edges of his rugged exterior. So you knew him well? I asked, feeling a strange mix of pride and defensiveness. Well, yes, ma'am. Mr. Amos was one of a kind. Colt's voice softened, and he looked at me with a hint of sadness in his eye. Matter of fact, he just told me last week he was leaving this ranch to you. Said he trusted you. You'd know what to do with it, even if it took some time to get your bearings. I felt an odd blend of gratitude and guilt knowing Uncle Amos had put his faith in me, even after all the years I'd been gone. He really thought I could handle all of this? Colt replied with a gentle, reassuring smile. He wouldn't have left it to you otherwise, Miss Georgia. Your uncle was a smart man, knew people better than most, said you had the kind hearted this place needed. His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, and I felt myself start to believe just a little that maybe Amos had seen something in me I couldn't yet see in myself. I opened my mouth to thank him, but a loud rumble interrupted me. My stomach had chosen the exact moment to remind me that I hadn't eaten since morning. Colt's serious expression softened, and a low chuckle escaped his lips. Sounds like somebody's in need of some supper. I blushed, laughing along with him, feeling the tension. Well, Nettie Faye left some soup beans and cornbread on the stove, and there's plenty. You're welcome to join me if you're hungry. He hesitated, glancing towards the house, but I could tell he was tempted. Well, I wouldn't want to impose, ma'am. You wouldn't be, I assured him. Please, come on in. He nodded, putting his hat back on, and we walked to the house together, the crunch under our boots filling the quiet. Champ trotted between us, his ears perked up and his head high, like he knew he'd done a real good job. I was keenly aware of Colt's presence beside me as the easy confidence of his stride and the faint scent of leather and cedar that lingered around him. Once inside, I set out two bowls while removed his hat again and rested it on the counter. He sat at the table, his hands folded politely in front of him, waiting like a true gentleman until I brought the food over. I ladled out the soup beans and set a steaming bowl and a slice of cornbread in front of him. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm and I can guarantee it's delicious, I said, suddenly feeling a little self conscious. He took a spoon and nodded appreciatively. Ma'am, this is better than any fancy dinner. Nettie Faye's cooking is just about the finest in the county. He broke off a piece of cornbread, which he savored. Your uncle was always right proud of this place, said he'd hope you'd find your way back, even if it took a little wandering to get here. A little wandering like years and growing up into an adult, I smiled, feeling a pang of sadness mixed with gratitude again as I wondered if Uncle Amos could see into the future and reflected that at this moment in my life, I'd yet to know what I wanted to be when I grew up, even though I was technically a grown up at the age of 27. He really talked about me that much? I asked again because I couldn't believe it. Yes, ma'am, Cope nodded, his gaze softened. Said you had a way with things, a natural feel for the land. I looked down at my bowl, feeling the warmth of his words settle over me. Part of me wanted to tell him I wasn't sure whether I'd kept the ranch or turned it over to Bo and Tassie, but the thought stayed buried in my mind. Tonight wasn't the time for that. Instead, I took a deep breath and met his gaze. Thank you, Colt. I'll try my best, I said. That's all anyone can ask, Miss Georgia, he nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. We ate in comfortable quiet, the faint sounds of the ranch settling around us, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt something close to like peace. Cussie, I said, breaking the lull. Colt looked up, pausing with his bowl tilted in one hand as he scraped up the last bit of soup. Excuse me? My name, I explained. I go by my middle name, Cussie. You can call me that. He studied me for a moment, a hint of a smile in his eyes. To me, you'll always be Georgia, since that's how your uncle talked about you, but I reckon I can call you Cussie if that's what you like. Thank you. I couldn't help but smile, feeling a little warmth at the way he said my name. Colt set his bowl on the table and leaned back. He slid his chair away from the table with an easy grace. Well, I guess I better get going. I guess we better get going. I raised an eyebrow, confused. We? Me and Champ, he said, nodding towards the cattle dog, who had settled himself at Colt's feet, his head resting on his paws, but his ears stayed alert. Colt stood, grabbed his hat from the counter, and sat it back on his head, where it seemed as much a part of him as his easygoing drawl. Oh, I tried to keep the surprise out of my voice. You live nearby? He nodded. I'm out in one of the bunkhouses with the rest of the ranch hands. Your uncle's always made sure we had quarters right here on property. Figured we'd be close by if anything was needed or tended to during the night. Memory surfaced of the ranch's busyness during those short visits. The men who'd come in from the pastures and the barns, talking and laughing. As a kid, I never given much thought to where they stayed. I just knew someone was always around helping Uncle Amos. I didn't realize that they lived here full time, I said, more to myself than to Colt. Oh, yes, ma'am, Colt said with a respectful nod. Amos believed in keeping this team close, like family. He trusted us and he respected him. I think that's part of what made this place run so smooth. He gave a little shrug. And, well, Champ's been bucking with us since. Well, since, Mr. Amos passed. Champ looked up at me, his eyes bright and expectant, and in that moment I felt a spark of something, a small but certain pull to take my own place here, even if I would be here only long enough to sign the deed over, since I was leaning towards that decision. If Champ lived here with Uncle Amos, I said, finding my own voice, then he should stay here with me. This is his home as much as it was Uncle Amos's, and I don't want to change that. Colt's eyes softened, and a slow smile spread across his face. Yes, ma'am, I think that'd suit him just fine. He gave Champ a little nudge with his boot. Looks like you're home, boy. Champ perked up with his tail thumping against the floor as if he understood. Champ perked up, his tail thumping against the floor as if he understood every word. He rose to his feet, trotted over to me, and pressed his nose into my hand with a gentle nudge of his own. All right then, boy, I murmured, scratching his head. Looks like you're bunking with me from now on. Guess that settles it then. Champ's got a new boss, Colt chuckled softly, tipping his hat to me. And again, I looked up and met his gaze. Thank you, Colt, for everything tonight. He nodded, his gaze warm and steady. Just by doing what Mr. Amos's would have wanted me to, ma'am. And if you need anything, you know where to find me. I watched Colt disappear into the darkness. His silhouette faded down the path towards, I guess, what were the bunkhouses. The night settled around me once more, quiet and calm, with only the soft rustle of trees in the breeze. Champ stood by my side, watching Colt go. And then, when the last trace of him vanished, the dog looked up at me expectantly. I let out a long breath, finally allowing myself to rub my neck and shoulders. The ache had been creeping up on me for hours, but I wasn't about to let on while Colt was around. No way did I want him to think I couldn't handle a single night's work, even if I wasn't yet sure I'd be staying. Champ, I sighed, giving my neck another rub. Do you know where Uncle Amos's keep those muscle cream? I laughed softly, feeling a bit ridiculous for talking to a dog, but that didn't stop me from giving him a scratch on his little head. Champ cocked his head and his intelligent eyes watching me carefully. Then he let out a little huff and trotted out of the kitchen. I watched him curious, and when he glanced back as if he said, "Come on," I followed, chuckling to myself. First, I made my rounds, checking the locks on each door to be sure that they were secure and casting one last look over the darkened pasture through the kitchen window. Dishes can wait in the morning, I muttered. I'm too tired to do more than to stick them. Dishes can wait in the morning, I muttered, too tired to do more than stack them in the sink. As though he had some final destination in mind, Champ was already waiting at the bottom of the staircase. I gave the doors one last tug to check the locks and followed him up. The creak of the old steps, familiar and comforting, echoing like Uncle Amos's ghost, was just around the corner. Chep led me down the hallway and into a large bathroom with an old-fashioned clawfoot tub, standing gracefully in the corner like something from another time. Shelves lined one wall, filled with glass jars and tins labeled in Amos's neat, faded handwriting. Eucalyptus salt, lavender soak, rub. I could almost picture him here, unwinding after a long day, his big frame sinking into the water, letting the aches of the ranch soak away. Thank you, Champ, I whispered, my heart swelling with a sudden rush of affection for the old dog. He seemed pleased with himself, wagging his tail, and trotted out of the bathroom to settle outside the door, his faithful watch never wavering. I twisted the tap and let the water fill up the tub and watched the steam rise and swirl in the soft light. The scent of the old wood and faint lavender filled the room as I unsecured a jar of lavender soak and sprinkled a handful of pale, grainy salts into the water. A rich floral aroma permeated the air, mingling the steam, and I felt the knots in my shoulders start to ease just as I thought of getting into the bath. After stripping off my dirty clothes, I sank into the hot water, letting in warmth soak every muscle, soothing aches I didn't even know I had. I leaned back, rested my head on the cool rim of the tub, and closed my eyes. The scent of lavender wrapped around me, grounding me, and the tension of the day seemed to start floating away. For a few peaceful moments, I felt like I was sinking into the past. This house, this ranch, memories of Uncle Amos everywhere. I let myself drift, wondering what if I could make this situation work, even if just for a while. The warmth made me drowsy, and I could feel myself on the edge of sleep, the water lapping softly around me. Suddenly, a loud pounding on the front door shattered my quiet. My eyes flew open, my heart raced as I shot straight up, sending water sloshing all over the edges of the tub. What on earth? I muttered hurriedly, grabbing a towel, wrapping it around myself. The pounding continued, louder and more intense, each knock rattling the quiet of the old house. I rushed to the bathroom door, water dripping around my arms and legs. Champ, already on high alert, stood at the top of the stairs with his ear perked and his whole body tense, and I felt a strange comfort just knowing he was there. Stay here, Champ, I whispered, but he followed close behind as I padded down the stairs, clutching the tightly towel around me. The house was dark and still, and every crack and shadow added to my nervousness. Reaching the door, I hesitated, my heart hammering. Another loud knock reverberated through the quiet house. I took a deep breath and I pulled open the door. The porch light cast a glow. And there, with his hand in his hat, stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with a uniform. My heart did a little flip as I looked at the familiar face, rugged with a day's worth of stubble, had softened by those same warm brown eyes I'd known from my short stints here in Bluegrass Ridge, particularly this ranch. Wade? I breathed the name, slipping out before I could stop it. Sheriff Wade Landry's eyebrows shot up, and for a moment he looked just as startled as I had felt. Well, I'll be Georgia Hollingsworth, cussy! He gave a low, disheveling chuckle, looking over me with a mixture of surprise and something else, something unreadable. His eyes drew up and down me, making me clutch the towel even more. Didn't expect to see you here. I figured you'd be jumping back on the first greyhound that rode out of here and heading off, never to be seen again, he said, ignoring that I was standing there in one piece of fabric. I blinked, still trying to wrap my mind around the knowledge that Wade Landry, the Wade who had gotten his dirt bike stuck in the mud in the woods and had dragged me along with his half-baked schemes that Uncle Amos told me to stay away from, was now standing on this porch wearing a sheriff's badge. I didn't expect to see you or expect you to be the sheriff, I shot back, recovering my voice. I noticed an edge of surprise, maybe even a little teasing that I hadn't meant to put there, but it just came out. His mouth curved into a crooked grin, one that was both familiar and maddening. Yeah, well, I guess life is full of surprises. He paused, his smile fading slightly, replaced by something more serious as he looked at the sight of me. So you're really here, like staying at the ranch? I squared my shoulders, feeling the weight of the situation settle on me again. I am. Uncle Amos left it to me. Wade's eyes widened slightly, and he let out a low whistle. Left it to you? He did? His gaze softened, and I caught the faintest trace of admiration in his eyes before he looked down, adjusting his hat. Well, I guess this makes things official. It does, I said more formally than I felt. So if you're here on ranch business, you're talking to the right person. Just give me a minute to go up and put on something more appropriate. Slowly, he nodded. Come on in, I said, leaving the door open for him to let himself inside before I darted up the stairs and found no robe but a pair of Uncle Amos's long johns and a flannel shirt. Quickly, I slipped into them and couldn't help but glance in the mirror. My hair, as once looked sleek and polished, now fell past my shoulders in loose, unswept waves, with no amount of brushing seemed to tame. My green eyes, with golden flecks, stared back at me, looking duller than usual, like they were carrying the weight of Uncle Amos's passing and the mountain of responsibility left in its wake. The flannel shirt hung a little loosely on my slim figure, but the oversized fit wasn't what got my attention. What was there was the faint golden tone of my skin, courtesy of the long night under the bluegrass ridge evening sun. That made me look even more at home here than I felt. A pink flush crept up my cheeks as I sighed, adjusting the sleeves of the shirt, which smelled faintly of hay and Uncle Amos's pipe tobacco. I headed back downstairs. Thanks so much. I was getting a bath, I told him. All right then, his voice softened and he stood inside the house, but the door was still open. I hate to come by this late, Cussy, but I wanted you to hear this from me. I swallowed, suddenly feeling nervous. What's going on, Wade? He took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering, his tone grew steady and low. The official autopsy report on Amos just came back. My heart pounded and I braced myself, gripping the door frame. Autopsy? I asked. I thought he died like my dad, a heart attack, genetics and all. Wade's eyes held mine, and there was no mistaking the gravity in the situation. Cussy, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your uncle didn't pass naturally. The reports confirm that he was poisoned. Horse tranquilizers. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. Poisoned? My strong, steady Uncle Amos taken down by something so underhanded? I blinked, my mind scrambling to make sense of it all. Are, are you sure? I stammered. Are, are you sure? I stammered, though I already knew Wade wouldn't be here if he wasn't. Yeah, he gave a single solemn nod. Whoever did this made it look natural. But there's no mistake in the toxicology reports. It was a high dose, Cussy, far more than any accidental exposure would explain. My mind raced and I shook my head slowly, trying to find my footing in a world that suddenly felt unfair. I don't understand. Why would anyone want to hurt him? I asked. It's Amos. Wade's gaze softened. For a moment, he looked as though he might reach out to steady me. I don't have those answers yet, but I promise you this. We're looking into it. Your uncle was a good man and respected. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Thank you, Wade, I replied with a slow nod, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. I appreciate you coming to tell me yourself. His mouth softened with a hint of a smile. Well, I figured the family would want to hear it from someone who knew him and who knew y'all. He glanced around as if to make sure no one else was listening, then lowered his voice. But I'm asking you to be careful, Cussy. Don't go poking around on your own. This isn't just ranch business anymore. I managed the small, tight smile I'd kept in my mind. Netty-faced soup beans were no longer sitting in my stomach. They were up in my throat. He nodded, tipping his hat slightly. Good. And if you need anything, you know where to find me. He took a step back and then hesitated and looked at me for a quite long while. Something unspoken passed between us just for a second. The years that seemed to melt away. I saw the boy I'd once known, full of charm and trouble, standing in front of me. Then he cleared his throat, and the sheriff was back in place. Take care, Cussy. I'll be in touch, he said. I watched him walk back into the night, his figure fading into the darkness as Champ pressed close by my side. As the quiet settled over me again, I felt a strange, unsettling mix of emotion, a sense of loss, shock, and maybe something else. Something that made my heart beat just a little faster. Champ gave a soft whine, nuzzling his head, and I reached down and scratched his ears as I whispered to myself, poisoned? Slowly, I closed the door, feeling like the world I'd known had just shifted into something darker and more dangerous. But a part of me, the part my uncle had always seen, maybe felt a quiet resolve taking root. Whoever had done this to Amos, I would find out one way or the other. Chapters 1 2, and 3 of Ranch and Red Herrings.